Hey everyone, good evening on this beautiful Friday here in Louisville, Kentucky. This is Seth Jones with instructor Chad Nuss at the Visual Arts Academy and Studio. We're so excited to be painting and drawing with you guys today. We had such a wonderful time doing this last time together that we decided to do it again. So Chad, you and I are back for another round, brother. What do you think?
Yeah, I love it. I was so excited once we got done. Like you said, we started talking about it right afterwards when the next time we were going to do it. So I've looked forward to this all week. So it'll be a good time.
It will be a good time. Thanks for jumping in and joining us, everybody. We're so glad you guys are here. If you weren't with us the first time, that's okay. I'll give you a quick recap real fast. What I'm working on is a 30 by 40 oil painting. I've got it zoomed in on a nice little background spot that I'm going to be working on today. And this is a painting of my daughter. I've already done the yellow ochre underwash, and I'm now working on what we determined the correct pronunciation of grisaille is. So I'm working on the grisaille, which is a full grayscale underpainting, if you will. And so now I'm working on some of the background elements and some of the other things here. Chad, what are you working on? What do you got going on back there?
So I've got what I call an apocalyptic landscape. It's about 6 foot by 3.5 foot. Large drawing using graphite and charcoal. And so I shifted down a little bit from the last couple times that we were on live. I was working up in the upper left-hand corner, but I've moved over now to this kind of upper middle section over into the right-hand corner. So this scene is a valley scene, and there's some storm clouds, and there'll be some mountains in the distance. So I'm going to work on some atmospheric perspective and some more landscape textures and things like that. So that's my plan for today.
That is awesome. And so this whole thing, guys, is really just a chance for you all to ask questions, be involved, get your sketchbook out, work on some drawings or paintings while you kind of get to work with us. Ask questions about techniques, thoughts, theories. Chad and I go on so many different tangents. We go on all kinds of different talking patterns. But please feel free to give us a like, follow, a share. Let us know you're here. Give us a comment in the comment section and start getting involved in the discussion, because it's a lot more fun when you guys ask us random art questions and we get to pontificate for minutes and minutes on end. So feel free to chime in. We're going to kind of work and talk through some stuff, but this is really for you guys and to continue to build the community. We have a lot of local individuals, but Chad, you've had a lot of people reach out as well from all over the globe that are asking to kind of have us go live with some of these things. So we're really excited to be live with you all. We're going to work through it, but feel free to chime in and chat.
Yeah, it's really cool that when people make comments and ask questions and everything, I mean, not only just practically speaking, it gives us some things to chat about and interact with each other, but it's also just awesome to just meet other people online that are artists or that are learning or kind of journeying with us at the Visual Arts Academy. So it's a really exciting time. I do really love to hear from people that are watching and just kind of see what they're thinking about and just bounce off ideas back and forth. So,
and look right there. There's our boy Joe jumping in. Let us know he's here.
There he is.
Tell you what, I'm excited to get him in the studio. He's going to be painting with us pretty soon, and I'm super stoked about it.
That's going to be great.
Yeah, he's going to love it. It's awesome. Joe, thanks for always joining us, brother. We really appreciate it.
So, Seth.
Yes.
I have 2 questions for you.
Oh, boy. Here we go. We're starting off strong.
Start off the discussion. So my first question I'll ask is the one I thought about just tonight, like when we were here before we got started, so I don't forget it. So since you do a lot of painting and I don't do as much painting, really not much at all, I would love to hear the different techniques on starting a painting, particularly thinking about, I noticed on both the paintings that you're working on right now, you actually go in and draw like a pencil or a charcoal sketch of the painting beforehand.
Yep.
And go over with the paint. But I've also seen some artists just go in with the paint without the drawing.
Yep.
So which of those do you prefer? Obviously, I would guess you would prefer the drawing since you've used that on those 2 paintings, but have you done the other technical or the other process a whole lot? And what are the pros and cons of doing each way?
That's a phenomenal question, and there are so many different methodologies, right? That's the great thing about art, is there's so many different ways to achieve your success and the goal that you want to achieve. And so I come from a very strong drawing background, illustrative background, where I would do a ton of thumbnails, sketches, sketches upon sketches and then revisions and then work directly into it. And so I tend to work either with a charcoal drawing or a graphite drawing down first, right? The charcoal works better with oils, and that's kind of how they guide you and teach you through it. But there's also the technique of drawing and marking your outline or your shape with just an underpainting, right? Just using the brush. And so some people prefer to do it that way. It keeps you more loose. I think by drawing with your brush, it allows you to work more loosely, more shape-driven, form-driven, right, Chad? Instead of being so detailed and so minute with all of your drawing elements, painting with the brush and outlining with the brush is a great way to kind of work looser to tighter, right? You use a bigger, stiffer brush, a more natural bristle brush. You use an underpainting or some marks to go in and make sure that you measure out appropriately if you're doing a portrait or if you're doing a still life to measure it out. And I think one of the benefits of doing it that way is it does force you to utilize your brushwork as a foundational element, right? You're not relying on such a refined drawing, such a refined sketch to build your painting off of. It forces you to be a little bit more loose. I was always taught through Alvarez and through other painters and some of my other professors and mentors is I always wanted to rework that drawing to get the composition exactly the way that I wanted to. And so there was a lot more pre-planning, if you will. There was a lot more of structural pre-planning, like dropping this element out, adding this element. And so I've just always kind of worked this way. And I like it because it leaves me a lot of notes. If some of the students that have been in my class, or if you've been on in some of the other lives, I like making notes, Chad, remembering that this is a shadow here, or this is where this highlight's going to pop. So I love having those. And you can see them here, even in the drawing and the painting, guys. You can see where I have some of these little notes here to remind me of darker values or highlights or things of that nature. So there's not really, I think that the traditional method is to use your brush work as a mark making tool. Mm-hmm. But I think that all are equally acceptable, especially nowadays when we have a lot of people are using acrylics as a base coat before they start painting in their oils, right? They're allowing that to kind of seal and prepare the canvas so you get a smoother canvas. There's been a lot of studies that done that, people are using spray adhesives to fix their charcoal or to fix their drawings so they don't smudge as you go through the painting process. So I think a lot of different techniques exist out there. It's just personal preference of what works best for you. And for me, I like a tighter drawing. I like to have a lot more notes on there because I don't, if you remember last time, Chad, I talked about, I don't reference my image as much, right? Yep. And my drawing allows me to make my own interpretations of my reference rather than just being so stuck on it. And so that's why I like having that drawing there.
So talk to me a little bit about, and this is related to what you're saying, even though it doesn't seem so at first, but talk to me how when you're using oil paints, how do you muddy up a painting? How does that happen?
Yeah, so
I've heard that term before several times.
Yeah, it is one of the biggest challenges, I think, with oils, and it kind of goes hand in hand a lot of times with most painting mediums, but oils, because they stay wet, it's easy to lose the pigment, right? It's easy to over mix. And so what happens is instead of placing colors, individually mixing my pigments, individually mixing my colors, you wet on wet blending because oils stay wet. You do wet on wet blending, and then you end up mixing a unique color rather than placing the color that you wanted. And so if you overwork and you keep working, you keep mixing all those colors wet on your canvas or your palette or whatever, or your board or whatever it is that you're painting on, you end up getting muddy, right? And so that's why you want to be careful with it. You don't want to overmix. It's very similar in watercolor. You don't want to overmix wet on wet in watercolor because then everything blends together, or it doesn't individually pop or stand out as a unique individual chroma. And so that's the challenge with oils is you have to be placing your pigments so that they don't mix and they don't become muddy. Because as you know, what happens when you mix a whole bunch of different colors, Chad?
Yeah, you just get a brown or gray sludge.
That's right. And so that's where you see some of the traditional masters. If you look at their palettes, they have all of their colors mixed out, right? And what you can see is this, and I'll put this up here, see if you guys can see that. So that's what my palette currently looks like. And so it looks like a hodgepodge of mix, but really all that is a giant value scale, right? It's just a giant value scale that's placed all over the palette, which allows me to place a pigment and not over mix. So that way they don't become muddy. Now it's not as prominent when you're doing a grisaille because it's just grayscale, right? So then you just end up getting a different tone. But you can imagine if I mix an orange and a blue wet on wet, right? And then I add in a green, and I don't let those colors stand alone, it ends up becoming a brown mess, a blob. And so that, I think, is what, when everybody's referring to don't overwork, don't get muddy, it's because you're over mixing wet on your material, on your canvas, on your linen, or on your board.
So I feel like if you started a painting, if you started painting without an underdrawing and you just started in with paint, I feel like you have there's a greater danger of muddying it, because as you're drawing with your paintbrush, so you might have to make adjustments as you're painting. I feel like it can get muddy very quickly because you're making so many adjustments. Whereas if you have the drawing there, you already know everything's in proportion, everything's where it needs to be. It's just a matter of putting the colors down where you want them. I mean, would you agree with that, or would you?
I do. Yeah, I do for the most part. I think that's a really valid point, right? And if you watch, there's so many people out there that you can consume and watch on YouTube and all these different platforms. They're very confident in their color choices, right? They're very confident, not saying that they don't make mistakes, not saying that they don't change things, but they're very confident in knowing, I want this color here, I want this color there. And I was always trained that if you're creating a value in between, you should mix that value and then place that pigment, right? So, you shouldn't just go in and stumble or wet on wet. You should actually mix those individual values and place them effectively. We've got Sarah that's jumped in. Sarah, good to see you. Thanks for jumping in and joining us. And then Chad, you have a question, I think. Or actually, I guess this may be for both of us. Do you ever use your non-dominant hand? If so, why? That's a question from Joe. Chad, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I just have a short answer, and that would be no. I never use my non-dominant hands when I'm drawing. I would have no control. It would be like trying to write a letter with my right hand. Like I'm left-handed, so I do everything with my left hand. The only opposite thing I do is I bat and I hit a golf ball as if I were right-handed, but everything else I do with my left hand. So like I have no control. So it would look like trash if I use my non-dominant hand. So no, I just stick with my left hand.
What a question. So I will share a quick story on that, Chad. And Joe, this is for you if you're still listening, brother. When I was at the Savannah College of Art and Design and I was doing my undergrad in illustration, there was a young lady there who I think was a year ahead of me, and she was one of the most talented artists I've ever seen. She was absolutely brilliant. Her work was so detailed. It was unbelievable. And I had seen her work, but I'd never had a class with her, right? So I didn't really know who she was. Finally, we had a class together. I come into that class, and she has a giant cast on her right arm. And I'm sitting there going, oh, and I'm talking to her, and I said, oh, what happened? And she's like, oh, I've had like 4 surgeries. I've had some major issues, all this stuff. And I'm like, oh, wow, that must really stink. And I'm like, good thing you're left-handed. And she goes, oh, no, I'm not left-handed. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what? Wow. And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, so all this work that you've been doing this year, she had been using her non-dominant hand. And she showed me some of her work that she did with her right hand, and it was incredibly loose. It was very expressionistic. And I said, well, why'd you make that choice? She goes, well, the doctors told me it was going to be about 1.5 years of recovery, and I didn't want to lose out on 1.5 years of school. Yeah. So she goes, I just hunkered down, and I realized that I could do this left-handed. And her work was, so detailed, you would never have known. It's amazing. And I asked her, I said, well, how were you able to achieve that? And she goes, it's amazing what happens when you slow down and you hyper-focus. And she goes, it takes me 3 times as long to do the work, but I'm able to do really great stuff that I could never do with my right hand. And I just think that the human body and the drive, I could not do that, right? Yeah. I pretty much do everything left-handed. But, it was amazing to see that. And I'm sitting there going, you know what? If something ever happened to my left hand, maybe I'd be okay. I think I might be all right.
I don't know. Whenever I try to use my right hand, like to write like words or whatever, my whole body gets tense, like trying to make my hand do what I want. So I can't imagine drawing like that. So
yeah, it was amazing. Incredible. I wish I could remember her name so I could look her up. But yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Great question, Joe.
So part of the reason why I was asking this is because we had talked about me doing some painting at some point. And so I would just, as I watch you paint, I'm trying to pick up little techniques here and there, just trying to think how I would do it. And the painting that I have done, I've done a little bit in my life. I usually do the route of I don't draw, I just start painting.
Yep.
But I've not used oils before, and I know overworking is an issue. So that's where that question came from. And I was just sitting here thinking, like, with oil painting in particular, since you're much more experienced with this, like, could you do it in a way in which you slowly build up layers? Then that way it cuts down on overworking. So
that's the traditional method of oil painting, which is glazing.
Okay.
Right. And so that is the traditional method of where you build up layers through a glazing technique, and you slowly build and apply chroma. And so that's where you get that translucent nature of it. That's where you do, you do all the different layering process and build that color up, which eliminates some. It shouldn't say eliminates, but it can help reduce some of that down. But you have to wait for the layers to dry. Right. You have to follow the methodology of it. And there's a lot of mediums now that have been added, Chad, where you can mix in like a Galkid Light, which is a drying medium, which allows you to work faster. It makes it more like an acrylic application. There's gel mediums that you can do. There's so many additional elements that you can put into your oil paints that you can work however you want to work. And if you need to work faster so that you don't get muddy, you can do that, right? There's ways that you can process that. But the traditional layering methodology of oils, I think, does help reduce down some of that muddiness, but you have to be patient. You have to have, patience as you work through it, so that way you can properly do the technique. But, alla prima painting is really powerful too. But yeah, I think to your point, they're very confident in their color placement, right? They mix it on their palette. They do palette mixing. They're not doing any wet on wet, not typically. And then they're placing those pigments and being confident in where they're going. And I think that's a really cool way to work as well. Hmm. If you watch the gentleman I referenced, the Will Rocheford, if you look him up, you'll see how he works, and he works very illustratively. He does a little bit of wet on wet, but not. I mean, he's pretty awesome in his application.
Yeah. Awesome. Go ahead.
I was going to say, so what do you think is the most intimidating thing about painting? Because you made a comment the other day while we were doing our live drawing session, and it's funny because I wanted to be like, Chad, that's exactly what terrifies me the most as well, because we both come from a pretty strong drawing background, right? And I think what scares you the most also scares me.
Yeah, I think it's just the color matching with real life things, So over the past summer, towards the beginning of the summer, I had this goal to paint, have one painting going all the time so I could learn. And I was using acrylic, and I took this picture of this field by my house. And I said over the summer, I took the picture when it was cold out. So I must have done it. I must have taken the photograph like in the fall and then decided in the spring to paint it. But either way, all that to say, as I was painting it, I did it I didn't draw it out. I just started painting. I was able to hit the sky pretty good as far as the tone. But then when I got into the field, I would look at the picture, and my eye was telling me that there was browns in it.
Yep.
And so I put some brown, and I would mix brown with some gray and really try to tone down the brown. And then I would put it on my little, I have one of those canvas boards, and I would put it on there. And then I would go back and I would look, and I was like, no, that actually looks more green. So then I would add some green, and then it would throw off the brown. And then I was like, well, no, it's actually more like grayish blue. So then I would add that. And it was just like, I just ended up doing that field like 10, 15 times, just because I would add one color that would dominate, and I didn't know how to offset it. I didn't know how colors sitting beside each other affected each other. And, I showed the photograph to my wife, and I would say, like, there's all this like real light, very subtle hint of red in here. And she's like, I don't see any red in there. I see all grays and blues. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then I would like pull the photograph away from my eye, and it would gray out a lot more. But then I would look it up close, and I would see different colors. And then I would look at like the masters, and I would see how they would add all those colors. They would be reds and browns next to greens and blues. And they were able to, by doing that, create that kind of cool gray color that I was trying to get. But it got so frustrating. I ended up quitting the painting because I just could not get to where it was. There was one time, and I took a photograph of it, where the color was not matching the photograph, but the color was working for the painting.
Yep.
And so I kind of wrestled with that, because then I would look at, the masters once again, and there's some masters where it's like straight on nature. It looks exactly like what they're looking at. And then there's others where it doesn't. It just, they use the color in the painting to make sure the color, the theory is working within the painting, regardless of what you see. And so I go back and forth about that, that approach. Like, is the goal, and I suppose this is different for every artist, but is the goal to match it exactly with nature, or is that part of the artist's job to interpret the colors? Or I want it to look like what I'm painting, but I also realize the value in using expressive colors as well. But I also don't want to use expressive colors as an excuse for not being able to match the colors, if you know what I mean.
As a crutch. Yeah. And so a couple of things. One, I'm so glad you say this, because my two older brothers, who I love dearly, I always joke with them that the hardest course I ever took through my master's degree, right, all the way from my freshman year to my fifth year when I finished it, was color theory.
Yep.
And they always joke at me. They're like, your hardest class was colors? They're like, I'll get you a box of Crayolas. You can pick colors from there. And I'm like, no, you guys don't understand. There's so much more to it than just that, right? Color is so challenging because of exactly what you said. Yes, you can pick and choose, and the great thing about the Impressionist and the Post-Impressionist, right, and even the Surrealist, Chad, was that they were making conscious decisions about using the color choices they chose. They weren't just randomly using them. They were making conscious decisions. They weren't using it as a crutch, like you had mentioned.
Yep.
I think the challenging part is determining what you're trying to achieve with your colors as an artist, because I think, you and I both strive to have strong technique. You and I both want to be masters of technique, but we also value so much the ability to not hold to a specific set thing, right? To not be so handcuffed to a reference photo or to a landscape. So finding that balance of correct color application versus our own emotional connection to the color application is constantly a challenge, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, great question or great comment here. I'm going to add this on the screen here. Is I believe that music theory was like that for me. Exactly. It's the same kind of concept of, oh, yes, this is what a structural musical composition is supposed to be. Here's the theory of music. But then yet also, too, I want to have that emotional relationship with it. I want it to be free form, kind of like jazz or blues, right, Sarah? It's kind of a hybrid of those two things, not saying they're mutually exclusive. But for colors, I think it's what terrifies me the most as well, because I want it to look natural. But yet at the same time, I want to be creative with it and use some of those master's techniques, which, Chad, I'm glad you said this. In our oil painting exploration, if any of you are watching who's taken our oil exploration, I force everybody to paint an apple in oils. And what I force them to do is to mix individual colors, about 15 to 20 different colors that they see in that apple, Chad. And so what you'll find is they'll isolate a bright yellow out, or they'll isolate a violet, or they'll isolate like a bright pink. And then they go, well, is it really there? And I go, well, show me. Is it in the apple? And they go, yes, it is in there. And when you apply it appropriately, you see these beautiful colors come together to make it look and feel like a genuine, real apple. It's the same thing with flesh tones, right, Chad? How many colors are in our typical pinks or browns? There's blues in there's violets, there's reds, there's oranges. There's all these different colors that come together to really present the color that we're perceiving and seeing. So I agree. That is the most scary and challenging thing. And that is what I'm absolutely terrified of doing on this painting after I finish the grisaille, is the color application.
Yeah, I saw a picture, or it's like almost like a little meme on social media of a painting by Rembrandt. And they showed in the shadow, like from far away, it looked like a darker tone, like a grayish brown or something. I forget what color it was, but it was like grayish brown, I think. And then they zoomed in, and it was actually like a bright green or something. But the way it interacted with the colors around it made it look grayish brown. Like it was the most striking thing I had seen when it come to color theory. That just the way the color changed.
Absolutely.
And I think, and so I think for me, I've worked in black and white pencil and charcoal so much that, I've color just intimidates me. So that's my weakness as an artist, because I really need to spend some time studying color theory and working on that. And so it's a challenge. It's a challenge for me when I.
Well, and it gets you out of your comfort zone, right? We talk about this a lot with our students. Is it forces you out of your comfort zone. You feel incredibly good about your values and your tones, your tints and your shades when working in grayscale. And even though all of that applies into chroma, right? Because if you take away chroma, all that you're left with is value, right?
Yep.
Because if you lose value, then you don't see anything. Then it just becomes a black mass or a black void. And so, you're very comfortable in that. But then when you apply chroma or color, guys, then you start going, oh, wait a minute. Is it working the way it's supposed to be working? And, I'll share a story with you. And I don't think my brother's ever watching this, but my brother, Zachary, has always been one of my biggest critics, right, Chad? Ever since we were little kids. He's been one of my greatest motivators and one of my greatest supporters. But I'll never forget when we were younger and I started doing drawings and paintings and things like more serious, he would always come over to me and be like, boy, you really messed up the colors. He would be like, the drawing looks amazing, but boy, your colors are off. And I've always struggled with that because I've always been like, well, I guess I'm just not good at colors.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just not good at that. And then I went into SCAD and I go to Deborah Moshe. Her name was Professor Deborah Moshe. If she ever watches this, you were an amazing professor. Thank you for everything you did. But I remember being in that class and I think I was one of the top students, but yet everything I did, she'd go, that's not accurate. That's not what you're really seeing. That's not manipulating that other color correctly. And I remember going, this is the hardest thing to pinpoint, right? It's the hardest thing to actually get perfect. But that's part of the joy too, is we're pushing ourselves. We're pushing each other. We're pushing our students in the academy. Their students are pushing us. And it's a lifelong, I go back to Michelangelo's saying, ancora imparo, right? And I'm butchering the Italian there. But the goal is to constantly be learning, constantly improving. And the journey of art is that no matter how great we are, how old we are, or how perfected we think we are with things, we're always going to get better.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
I want to bring up real quick. Joe's got a comment here. My first tattoo I drew myself, the one and only time I ever sketched anything. I was 18. I traced a Maltese cross and freehand everything else. I remember being so stressed out. Yeah.
Yep.
But you did it. And that's awesome.
So my other big question for you that I was thinking about all day today.
Oh, here we go. This is going to be good.
So I would love to hear your opinion as a painter, as someone that's done quite a bit of painting, on the relationship between abstract and realism, and what your preference is, and pros and cons of each. What are some things that you may not like abstract, but you may appreciate some things about it. So what are those things? Or you might love abstract.
Well, first thing, Chad, and I know, some of the people that may be watching this, they may, kind of scold me for this, but I still don't know if I call myself a painter. Like, I know that sounds really bad because, people look at my painting and they're like, oh, this is nice. And we have a whole gallery upstairs that has a bunch of my paintings in there. Yeah. But I still don't feel like a painter, if that makes sense. I look at people like Mitchell Kaufman and I look at, some of these other artists that I see and I'm like, no, those guys are painters. And maybe some of it is just, that self-actualization, right? Like, I just started painting again about, 7 or 8 years ago because I was focused so heavily on drawing and cartooning and other things. I didn't paint as much. I always painted, but not as much. But I still struggle with calling myself a painter. And I'm being completely honest. I'm being genuine. And I feel like I'm always constantly learning, especially with oils, right? I'm still constantly always learning that process.
Yeah.
But thank you for calling me a painter. I really appreciate that. That makes me feel really good.
Well, I'm getting you back because you always call me the master draftsman, and it always makes me feel so intimidated. So, right back at you.
Well, look, if anything, you are a master draftsman, and I am very comfortable letting all of our students and all of our participants know that you are a master draftsman. But thank you for that. But so if you want to know the truth, I value so much of both in painting. I love the ability and the technique and the skill it takes to do hyperrealism because to me, it shows that you have a mastery of the medium, right? You have become a master of said medium. And I love the fact that people are able to focus so intensely on something to get that level of detail. But if I'm being honest, I prefer a little bit of that, what we call painterliness in there, right? I love the fact that you can still see the brush strokes. And like you were talking about how you see it up close and you go, that's not what I saw from 20 feet. 20 feet, it looks like detailed stitching, or it looks like a perfect zipper. But then you get up close and it's just a whoop, it's just a little brush mark, right? And you're like, how in the heck did that little brush stroke with a little hint of yellow in it turn out to be a gold zipper from 20 feet, you know? And to me, that's even more mastery. To me, that's even being able to do things, manipulate the viewer, manipulate the mind to see what you want to see. And there are people that are masters of this in so many different realms. You know, one of the great examples is Norman Rockwell, right? I mean, his work was so detailed and so beautiful, but yet he had this painterly quality to him that kept the energy, right? It kept this energy to it and this sense of joy. And I think it was really, you know, amazing, you know, that you were able to achieve that level of balance. So I think I have a value for both, but I like finding somewhere in the middle. I think that's really, really cool. You got a question, Chad? You want to take that one? You want to move your camera around a little bit and show them the whole piece?
Can I see? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I thought it was when I first read it said I can see the top left. I'm like, okay, great. All right, hold on one second. I'm gonna have to slide. Oh, geez. Hold on. There we go. Okay. Let's see. So you mentioned that you want to see the top left of the painting. This isn't a painting per se. This is a pencil drawing. So I'm using graphite and charcoal right now. And that's the upper left. It's hard to see the bottom. It's a pretty big piece. It's about 3.5 feet tall and about 6 feet wide. So I'll try to lean back so you can see the whole thing there. And so what I'm working on right now is this main large mountain range right here. And once I get a little bit further down, then I'm going to shift over and work on, there's a bit of a valley over here to the right. So I'm going to start over there. Let me move this over here. There we go. So I'm going to start getting into this area, which is there's a secondary mountain back into the drawing plane, I guess you could say. So I'm going to use a little bit of atmospheric perspective to make this look like it goes back hundreds and hundreds of miles. So that's kind of where we're at right now with this.
And yes, Lil Esquire, that is on paper. He is drawing that on paper, but he's got it attached to a wood board panel. So that way it provides that stability. Our studio has some stone on it, and so he would get a heavy texture. So he's taped it to a giant wood panel, and he's working on that on paper.
Yep.
Great questions. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I'm going to dive back a little bit, Chad, because I want to go to another extreme. I have immense value in very impressionistic, post-impressionistic, and surrealist paintings, right? Mm-hmm. Because I think that they were able to push the envelope of painting at that time, if that makes sense. Like, you know, a lot of people are like, I don't like Jackson Pollock. I don't like Pollock. Well, I would challenge people, don't only, you know, go see a Jackson Pollock in person, right? There's a whole different energy of seeing his work in person. And not only that, it wasn't happenstance. He was very much conscious of the decisions that he made and the applications that he made. Now we see a lot of painters that just kind of throw things around, or they say it's philosophical or it's this, and I'm not knocking it. It's beautiful work. There's a place for all of that, and the art is very expansive. But you're asking how I take that. I think that those individuals that were able to push a painting technique further are genius, right? But the funny thing is they were also most of them were able to paint at a high level of realism as well. They weren't just using it, as we talked about with color. We weren't using color as a crutch. We weren't using, you know, impressionistic paint application or splatter painting as a crutch because they weren't able to do high level realism or high level traditional painting techniques. They were doing it because it's where they felt their energy and their movement going, and they were doing it for the first time or before anybody knew about it. So I love the fact that they were able to progress as an art medium and the medium itself. But I personally resonate a little bit more with that blend of the two. the realism with painterly elements, just like the pants that I've been painting on, right? If you look at those, I think I've done a nice job on these pants down here, Chad, where the brushwork gives you the idea of the texture of these pants. It's not photorealistic, but boy, does it feel very real, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this question kind of came out as I was flipping through, excuse me, one second. As I was flipping through social media. So on Instagram, I follow a lot of different artists and art museums and art magazines and all that kind of stuff. So I see a lot of like contemporary art, and there's a lot of right now figurative painting is very big, but typically I feel like the technique is very sloppy.
Yeah,
and it's kind of frustrating to see the kind of paintings that are put up as modern masterpieces that I think are just horribly done, in my humble opinion. But at the same, and then there's a lot of other stuff that just looks like kind of rehashed, like Basquiat or Jackson Pollock, as you mentioned, or some of the abstract expressionists that are just like, moving paint around on the canvas, which I think there's some value to that. You can get some really cool effects and really tell a story with color. I'm not discounting that type of painting at all, but I just think when it comes to, it's hard for me when I see someone like Jackson Pollock, who was the first one to do it. Yep. And then 20, 30 years later, people are still doing that.
And calling it the greatest.
Yeah.
And proclaiming it as the greatest advancement in painting. Yes.
Exactly. And trying to get excited about that when I'm like, well, that's really all that's already been done. And sure, you can make the argument that you're just exploring that style, and I get it. But at the same time, I don't know. Like for me, so over the summer, I painted a self-portrait, and it was a big painting. It was like one of these big drawings, and I was doing it in acrylic. And as I was painting it, I decided that I wanted it to be more abstract. I wanted it to be, that's for Lil Esquire. Yep. Giving a little preview of the pants there.
So hopefully you can see those and you get what we were talking about. I'm sorry, Chad, I don't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good. Go for it.
This is an example of what I was referencing, Little Esquire, where if you get up really close, let's see if I can get that for you. You can see how painterly that is. There's a lot of brush strokes, a lot of different mark making. But then as you advance back and you see it from a distance, you can really hopefully get the idea of the texture and the form of those pants. So that's what I was referencing when I say that's what I try to find. And Chad, if you want to go back to that, because you were going on a path that I wanted to come back to, because I have a point that I think you and I both are or have, and I think it explains why you and I have the sensitivities and the preferences we do. But please finish your thought, Little Esquire. I hope that's what you were looking for, so you can see that. And thank you for all the comments and the feedback. That's great.
Yeah, so I was doing the self-portrait, and I decided at one point to do it more of an abstract, and my whole intention was to give the feeling of my personality rather than a hyper-realistic painting of my face. And so I started going in with primary colors and did a lot of mixing on the canvas, and I was able to get some really cool, like abstract, like brush strokes and a lot of, fluid movement and everything. And I would go in and I would try to paint the eyes, and they just wouldn't look right. And then I would try the nose, and then I would try the lips, and I painted over each one of those parts several times. And I eventually just landed on having this blank face with all these color variations. And I thought that's a pretty cool painting, but I really wrestled with myself. Like, am I just leaving that because the eyes didn't work and I couldn't get it where I wanted it to go? And so that was more of a decision out of just giving up, or was that, the intention for my painting or whatever? And so I wrestled with that, and I still wrestle with it. I like the painting. I don't think it's one of those that's going to like land on anyone's wall at any time soon, but I don't know. I just go back and forth about the value of abstraction. Now, I do abstract work, a lot of geometrical type philosophical work, and that's all very 1000% intentional, every mark. So I get that. But when it comes to painting, for me, I see a lot of that abstraction. I just wonder, like, is it because they can't paint realistically? And is that even a goal? Do you have to be able to paint realistically first before you can land a really good abstraction?
I saw something, and I wish I could think of the artist that says this. And I don't know if I agree with him or not, but he basically said something along these lines, Chad, which is just because the forefathers or forewomen came before us and were able to achieve these things, right, doesn't mean you get to take the cheap way out. Doesn't mean you as an artist get to take the shortcut. You need to progress through it. Now, you don't have to take as long because they were the first to do it, right? But you have to do the due diligence of knowing your perspective. You have to know your value, your color theory. You know, it's you should train yourself. You should work to train yourself through the proper processes so that when you do get there on the other side of the, you know, the hyper creative, if you will, it has the umph, it has the, or as Lil Esquire is saying, you know, it has that mojo, right? It has that proper energy, because I believe that even viewers that aren't trained in the arts can tell when something has depth, right? Or when something is just a facade. Somebody's just pouring paint on a canvas or splattering. Or, boy, there was a lot there. There was that mojo, like Little Esquire is saying, right? Like, there's that energy there. There's that backbone. There's, you know, the depth of the piece that's speaking through and coming through. And so I agree with that gentleman that said you don't get to take the shortcuts. You need to go through the processes. Doesn't mean you have to spend your whole life like they did to get there because they were the first to do it. But you should go do your due diligences and learn all those traditional methods and know how to actually do it appropriately, right?
That's good. Yeah, I appreciate that. Did you see Sarah had a question for you?
Oh, let's see that. Okay. Sarah, thanks for the question. Let's see what you got. Seth, is there a reason why you chose that color type of paper for that painting? Okay, so this is a 30 by 40 canvas, and I did my underdrawing on it, and I coated my underdrawing so that it would stay for me. And then I did a yellow ochre wash. Yellow ochre and raw umber are two of my favorite colors. And I love doing a yellow ochre wash underneath because that color does pull through. That color shines through the painting. If you could see really, really closely, you'll see that there's certain areas that the paint is not adhering to the canvas and that yellow ochre is shining through. And you actually do get some of that glow. Like if you really see close up on this face, I don't think you're going to get it, guys, but you'll see that there's areas where that yellow ochre shines through. So I think it adds depth. It also adds color unity. And instead of working on just a white canvas, it gives me a neutral color, a neutral pigment to base everything around it off of. So it allows me to get better, it gives me better values, better comparison values, right? So I can compare my lights to my darks to my midtones and so on and so forth. But I personally like the yellow ochre. I sometimes use a raw sienna, which is like an earthy red. I'll do all kinds of different things. There's artists that will use greens, blues. There's acrylic artists that will use these vibrant neons underneath because it pops and it shines through. So, Sarah, that's why I picked the yellow ochre underneath, because it helps me establish a color balance, and it also allows me to have that pigment shine through and show through. Oh, no, Little Esquire, you're not interrupting a class at all. We are just taking questions. We like all these questions. We're just guiding through it. This is just a sit down. Join us as we paint and as we draw. We do offer courses and classes here, but our live sessions are just a chance to interact with other artists and to bounce back and forth between Chad and myself and have a fun time and interact. So you're not interrupting at all. Please continue to ask questions. We love it. We enjoy it. It's a lot of fun for us and hopefully fun for everybody that's involved as well. And if you like what you're watching, we do these periodically throughout the week. Give us a like, share, a follow. We appreciate all the comments, all the feedbacks. We're going to try to make these fun, add some other artists, bring in some other individuals to bring some flair to it and ask them some tough questions. Chad gets a lot of tough questions thrown at me. He likes to give me those ones that push me, which I appreciate. So thank you guys for all the feedback, all the following. It's wonderful. Thanks for being a part of it.
Yeah, Lil Esquire, that's what you're doing is exactly why we're doing this, so that we can interact with people. And excuse me. Man, it's the second time. I'm getting all choked up, emotional. I just had a tickle in my throat there for a second. But yeah, this is why we do this, so that people get on and talk with us, and if they have questions and they want to learn as an artist or they want to contribute to the conversation, we love that. So yeah, don't feel ashamed to do it.
I want to go back to something that he said, which he goes, and he goes, and I don't think I'm a painter, or he says he's not a painter. I really appreciate that, Lil Esquire, but it's different when you feel confident in what you're doing, right? It makes you like, I don't want to proclaim myself as a painter yet. I know I'm a decent painter. I know I'm good at painting, and I feel very confident that I can instruct my students at a very high level. But when I think about, my mentor, Alvarez, who was an exceptional painter, when I think about some of these other artists that I follow and am inspired by and motivated by, I don't feel that I'm on their level yet. Now, that could just be some what do you call it, lack of self-confidence, Chad, maybe, right? Maybe that's what it is. Maybe people see my work and they go, dude, you're right there with them. You're up there on that same level. And I hope that's where I'm at. I want to be at that level. But my confidence is not the same as it is perhaps with some of the other things. And so that's why I struggle, Lil Esquire was saying, I feel very confident that I am a very strong painter. I think I'm good, but I want to continue to get better. And I don't want to be complacent. One of my great professors, Michael Cummings, he would always say, complacency will kill you. You can't become complacent, because as soon as you become complacent, your work lacks that mojo, Lil Esquire. It lacks that energy, because you're kind of sitting back on your laurels, right? You're sitting back on your haunches and just going, yeah, I'm good enough. And I don't ever want to be that way. And Chad, I know you don't ever want to be that way. So we're really pushing, we're really working ourselves. And I think, what's great about these live sessions, Chad and I are both pushing ourselves to do this in front of people and to motivate each other. This painting is a big challenge for me.
Yeah, for sure. Like this is a huge challenge for me too, because I've never done a landscape at this size, and I've never done a landscape that's pretty much out of the top of my head, which is terrifying, because I have it planned out, but I didn't sit down and sketch each part out before I started it. So even as I'm sketching this part, I'm constantly thinking in my head, okay, how do I need, what place do I need to adjust to make it look more real? And I'm constantly looking in the camera, because it gives me a good kind of far away view, just seeing what I'm doing. But yeah, it's we're always trying to push ourselves to get better. And even when I'm working on something like this, I already have in my mind like the next thing I want to do that's even bigger and better, not bigger and better, but bigger and more difficult and more challenging. And so
isn't that the truth?
Yeah. So that's kind of one of the challenges of being an artist as well, as for me at least, and I've noticed this with my daughter too, and Seth could probably speak to this as well, is that you have a tendency to start a lot of projects because you keep coming up with new ideas, but it's very challenging to just finish something first. And then, it's okay to have multiple things going on. Like I've got multiple projects going on right now, but the challenge is to stick it out and actually finish projects. So yeah,
absolutely. I agree entirely. And I think it's also a blessing too, because you're always constantly motivated for that next thing. I just started a whole nother piece. Maybe I'll pan out here in a second and show you guys. I've got another one drawn, and I cannot wait to start it. And so it's also exhilarating and, exciting when you have multiple pieces, because you want to keep getting to it, right? You want to get to that next one. And I think that's a lot of fun. Sarah's got a great question, which I had up on the screen here in a second. And Sarah, I'll show you actually. And this is just my take, and I'll explain why. I think that eyes are the hardest thing to paint. And sometimes the hardest thing to draw. And the reason that is because we as humans look at eyes more than we look at anything else. We are constantly staring at either our own eyes in our mirrors. We're looking at other people's eyes. I know some people don't like to look at people's eyes, right? But we typically look at eyes more than anything, and we even create eyes, right? We have the condition where if you look at an outlet, you see two eyes and a mouth. When you look at vehicles or cars, you see headlights as eyes, right? Because we're constantly humanizing and creating features out of things because we can relate to it. And the challenge with eyes is they tell you so much. There is so much information in the eyes that it's really hard to capture it. And I think it's even harder to capture that with the eyes of people that because you have these preconceived ideas of what their eyes tell you or what their facial features tell you, that little smirk, that little turn up of the lip. Those things are really hard because if you don't capture it exactly, it's not the likeness, right? It doesn't capture that person's likeness. And I think that's one of the big challenges. So I think personally, one of the hardest things to paint for the face are the eyes. I think that's an incredible challenge.
Yeah, for me, I would say the hardest part as a general principle is getting a likeness of someone is so challenging, because you can learn how to draw a generic eye, you can learn how to draw a generic nose, a mouth, whatever. But when you're drawing a portrait of someone, it is incredible how even the tiniest adjustment can make a world of difference. And the reason why is just like what Seth was saying, like we're so used to seeing faces that if you see something that's a little bit off, it just really is highlighted and it really stands out to you. So for the best example I can think of is if you have a set of twins and you look at both their faces, you can immediately tell which twin is different than the other because their features are just slightly off. So now imagine that you're doing a portrait of someone, you're basically drawing their twin. And so if it's not exact, it's not going to be a identical twin anymore. It's going to be more of a, I don't know what you call like a paternal twin or something that still looks similar, but it's just slightly off. And I've noticed that when I've done portraits of people that, you'll be drawing up close, it'll look like them, and then you'll step away, and it doesn't look like them at all, or it's just a little bit off. And then you go in and you can literally move a line on like one of the features of the face, just even a hair or just over a little bit, and all of a sudden their face is there, like it looks like them. I feel like that's such a challenge, is to capture someone's likeness and their personality in a portrait
100%.
of the face. Yeah.
Well, and that's currently where I'm at with this one, is that I have to continue to work this to make this feel and look like her, right? It's close. You can definitely tell that this is Cora, this is my daughter, but it doesn't have it doesn't capture what I'm trying to achieve with this painting of her personality. So I have to keep massaging it. Chad and I like to call it sculpting. We're sculpting the drawing, or we're sculpting the painting, because you're trying to chisel away at it, find those details, find those little nuances that really make it pop. And Chad has been reminding me of this story about his drawing of his wife behind him. You can kind of see it behind him there. It's a spectacular drawing, Chad. Yes, absolutely, that one. And he was telling me he kept working it, and then all of a sudden he made a couple of adjustments, and boom, there she was. That was his wife, Elizabeth, right? Like that was her on the paper in the drawing. And I think sometimes you have to remind yourself, you need to kind of keep working it, because you're going to get there, right? You're going to get there. You just got to keep sculpting it and chiseling it away.
Was it one part I didn't tell you that was like insane was I would look at her portrait straight on, and then I would step back about 5 feet and over a couple feet and look at it at an angle, and it wouldn't even look like her at all. Yeah. It was so maddening, because I'm like, from this angle it looks exactly like her, but over here it doesn't. And it's like if you've seen the classic thing where someone draws a picture and the way you do the eyes,
yep,
you can do the eyes in a certain way where they look at you wherever you are in the room. Or you can if you just move the pupil over just a little bit, it won't be looking at you at all. And it's very similar with that. Like just the tiniest adjustments mean a world of difference when you're.
And that's what separates the masters, right? I mean, yeah. That's why, what is it? The girl with the pearl earring, I think they said that your brain function increases when you actually look at her.
Yeah.
And it's because of the way that the piece is designed, right? Yeah. It was structured in a way that stimulates your brain significantly more, and we've got a comment here, which I think is an interesting one. Would it be easier to paint, a deceased individual's eyes? And I don't know. I think that's a really challenging question, because I haven't seen enough, right? I've seen a couple in person, but I haven't really experienced it heavily, so I don't fully know. But I would imagine it may be even harder to get nothing, because I think naturally we put something in there, whether it's something that's ourself, right? Or there's some energy in there, right, Chad? That maybe it would actually be harder, Little Esquire, to create it in a way where there's a blankness. I think there's a concept there that maybe that's an even bigger challenge.
Yeah, and not to get too philosophical or theological or whatever, but I've been to a couple of funerals. I haven't been to a lot, but of the funerals of like family members that I've been to, when you look at their body, and I don't mean to be like disrespectful or gruesome, but the reality is like there's something gone about that person. And so it's like part of what you're drawing when you're capturing a portrait is their personality. So it would be very difficult, I think, if you're talking literally draw a dead person's eyes, I think it would be very difficult if you knew them personally to just draw straight eyes, because you would lose so much of who they are in drawing it. That really does affect how you draw a portrait, is their personality. And so that's why I think, as Seth has said, that sometimes drawing relatives or loved ones is often more challenging, because you're bringing to the canvas or the piece of paper so much of their personality in your head and in your mind, that's hard to look at them objectively. I think it would probably be a bit easier to draw someone that you don't know rather than someone that you do know, versus someone that's alive versus someone that's dead, you know.
I completely agree with that. I think drawing people that you don't have a relationship with is significantly easier.
Yeah.
Because I'll share an example, and maybe this is too much of a personal example, but I have this thing where when I see my mother, who I'm very close to my mother, I know the nuances of her face, right? I'm very close to her, and I know that. And the funny thing though is every time I see her now that she's older, I still envision her in her mid-30s, right? Like my brain that's where she always kind of resonates, is in her mid-30s. And so even though, she's older now and she doesn't have her brown hair, she's got this beautiful white silver hair, I still see her as that mid-30s, late 30s mother that I have. And it's kind of like that same theory with your kids, right? Your kids are always your little babies, right? You always vision them at that kid stage, even though they grow and they change. And so I think you have these preconceived ideas of the people you care about. And when you start seeing wrinkles that you don't always pay attention to, that would make them look like them in a portrait, right, Chad? Yeah. All of a sudden to you, it doesn't look like it. Well, my mom doesn't have those crow's feet. My mom doesn't have those kind of wrinkles, And so it becomes a bigger challenge because you're so attached to them that you don't see it for what it really is. The old saying, draw what you see, not what you think you see, right? Yeah. And oftentimes when you draw what's really there, you go, wait, that's not them. Wait, that's not them. That's not really there, even though it is.
Yeah, I mean, that is exactly the conversation that we had earlier tonight with my daughter. She is a phenomenal artist, and she drew this picture. She has this cartoon character called Clementine, and she drew this amazing picture of her cartoon character. And in her mind, the legs looked one way. But for me, as an objective outside viewer looking at her drawing, I told her it looked very different from what she thought it looked like. And it's amazing how the eye and the mind can play tricks on you, where you think it looks like one thing, but then someone else will come in. And this, Seth and I joked about this before, is like, I will show a drawing to my wife and thinking, oh, I think I really got it. I'm going to show her. I hope she loves it. And I'll show it to her, and she'll be like, oh, is that a picture of some horses? I remember she literally did that to me one time. I had this comic book drawing, and it was all my characters, and it was very detailed, very ornate, a lot of stuff going on. There was not a single horse in the drawing. He literally saw a horse in the drawing, and it took me having to say, do you not see the face here? Do you not see the arm here? And she was like, well, yeah, now once you say that, I see it. And I thought to myself, well, that's a problem, because I'm not going to be standing next to everyone that's looking at my drawing. Absolutely. And be able to explain all of that. They need to be able to get that information themselves. So all that to say, our mind or our eyes can really trick us, especially if we're working on something for such a long time. It's hard to have a really objective view. It's the same with if you've drawn something, you put it away, you haven't looked at it for years. It always fascinates me when I see something I drew when I was younger, and knowing what I thought about it at that age and now seeing it with fresh eyes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or there's some drawings that I did when I was younger, I put away because I hated it. I thought it was horrible. And then I'd come back and I'd be like, oh, that was actually pretty good. But at the time I just couldn't get over it. I couldn't break my eyes from seeing what I thought I was seeing, so.
Something that we get a lot, Chad, is we get a lot of young artists that come in here that express high levels of frustration, right? They get very frustrated because the progress isn't going the way that they think it should, or they're struggling finding that balance of realism with their own self-expression. Or it could just be they're not feeling like they're mastering a technique very well. What kind of coaching do you give to a young artist that feels like, I'm getting frustrated. I'm getting to a point where, I felt like I was achieving some advancement. I felt like I was growing, but, I feel stuck. What kind of coaching do you give to an artist that maybe feels like they're stuck at a moment?
Yeah, it's a combination of a couple things. I mean, the first thing I would do is try to encourage them by pointing out some things that they can see that they've improved on, and use that to leverage. Like, look, you are improving, as you can see by this other technique that you tried. Now you just have to think about it and just like that. Like, it's going to be a process. We're all in process, and so I often remind young artists, like, everyone is in process. No matter who you're looking at, what art you want to imitate, or what artists you emulate, no matter how good they are, they're in process as well. And they were at a point where you're at too at one point, and it took a while to get to that point where they're at, today. And it's the same with the young artists. Like, it can get so discouraging because all you're focused on is everything you can't do.
Yeah.
But you need to take what you can't do as motivation to get better, but not as discouragement to not try. And I think that's a really fine line for a lot of people, to see their mistakes and their failures and their weaknesses, and where they feel like they're not that great, as motivators to get better. And that's all you can do. Otherwise, you'll stop drawing or painting, and then you've definitely lost. That's definitely a failure. So
I agree with that. We've got a couple of really great comments, Chad. If one little Esquire who's been with us for a while now, thank you for all the comments. It's great. He says it's kind of like when you think you know the lyrics of a song and then you actually read them and you're way off.
Yeah.
but this is the kicker, though. This is what he's saying, and I agree with this. But then from that point on, you hear both versions.
Yep.
Right? You hear both sides of it. You hear your own interpreted lyrics, but then you also know the actual lyrics of that individual song. I think that's a really valid point. And I like what Luke Talks VT here is saying, is that's why you keep old artworks to look back upon. I love to encourage new artists and friends to keep their first artworks, because the first few months, in his opinion, are the ones that are getting the most improvement. And I agree, right? Yeah. You have these giant increases. It's climbing a hill, it's climbing a mountain, and then you hit a false plateau, and then you feel like you're stuck. But really, you're so much further along than you were before. You just forget to look back. And so I agree with you, Luke Talks VT. That's absolutely accurate. It's healthy to hold on to those things to see where you once started and where you go. And that's why I challenge people to do portraits every year, to do a portrait. And you look at the great masters, Chad. I know you reference a lot of the great masters. When you see their portraits over time, you see technique changes, you see energy changes, you see that oomph that comes and goes, right? And I think it's interesting and it's healthy to do those challenges, because you will see your improvements or your changes or your modifications. And that's a really neat thing. I think people forget to do that a lot. They forget to self-reflect.
Yeah, it's funny. All I could think about for Little Esquire's comment is I do love to listen to Nirvana, and there are so many times where I'll like be singing with them in my head, or sometimes in the car, and I am singing like totally made up words for some of the songs. And now on our iPhones or Amazon Music, it'll show the lyrics. And I've gone back and I'm like, what is he saying right here? And it's like, you realize you're so far off because you just heard the sound and not the actual words. It's so funny how I've like rediscovered so many of Nirvana's songs, because I thought they were saying completely different things. So
well, and it's so funny because my wife is a lyricist. Like, she's all about the lyrics, the meaning of the lyrics, the poetry, right? Like, she's so focused on that. And I'll sing songs with her, and I don't care because I don't know any of the lyrics. I don't understand what anybody's saying. And she's like, that's not what they're saying, right? I'm like, yes, I know. I'm like, but to me, the lyrics are just another instrument, right? Like, they're just part of the composition, the musical composition. But it's really interesting because I very much struggle with lyrics, Lil Esquire. I struggle knowing what they said. I'm of the generation when they used to come in the cassette card, and you'd have the lyrics actually on the cassette or on the record, you know, like you can actually see what they wrote.
Yeah.
They don't do that much anymore.
Luke Talks has another comment. He says, the plateau the plateau is what gets most people. I regret not having my first artworks when I started taking art seriously, if only to encourage other artists that they can do better, that through perseverance, humility, and curiosity, they will be able to reach the stars. So yes, absolutely. Like, one of the keys of being an artist is, you know, we focus so much on the end product, but the reality is behind every great artwork was years and years and years of, as you said, perseverance, humility, constantly going back to it. I just read a quote the other day, and I shared this with Seth, with some of the students here, from Michelangelo, and I'm going to butcher it because I don't have it memorized. But basically, he was saying that, you know, you think of these great artists like Michelangelo, and you think how wonderful it is. And his quote was paraphrased, was basically, if you knew the amount of work and the amount of time and the effort it was to get to where I'm at, you wouldn't think it was so wonderful, which is so true. Like, the amount of hours it takes to learn how to shade and how to use tone and how to get likeness and understand proportion and perspective is incredible. And so as an artist, one of the keys to being if you want to say successful or a growing artist, is that ability to continue to work hard regardless of what failures you run into. I mean, that really is the mark of those artists that go on to achieve great things. It's very easy to sit around and say, I'm going to draw this picture, I'm going to get better at this, I'm going to do whatever. It's very different to actually put in the work and get to that point when you can do it, you know?
Yep. I agree. Well, and you see the same thing in a lot of other realms as well, right? Which is, you know, you hear it with athletes all the time. Well, they're just gifted with a natural ability. And I'm sitting there going, oh, you know, I wouldn't go that far. There's so much work and effort that gets put into that, right? You know, yes, talent is a thing. I'm not denying talent, right, Chad? Like, talent is a very real thing.
Yeah.
But the hard work, the execution, the ability, you know, like he was saying, not to get stuck into a plateau, that's where the hard work perseveres, right? When things become harder as an artist, you have to persevere through them. And I like what he says, failure isn't a thing in art, you know, and Luke, you know, Luke Talks, I agree with you. You know, I think failure is a thing, like Chad said, when you stop.
Yes.
When you stop, that's when failure becomes real. You know, it's, you know, Bob Ross made it famous, happy mistakes, right? You know, he made it so famous because he made it such a positive energy type thing. But the reality is the only thing that's becoming a failure is when you stop producing what you're called to produce, which is to be creative. And, you know, there's a saying that my wife uses. She's a big fitness individual. And she goes, the only bad workout is the one that didn't happen. Yep. Right. And that's the same kind of thing. The only bad piece of creative is the one that never came into existence. Right. You know, there's some bad technique. There's some bad execution. Sure. But, you know, I think if you're doing it in a sense of self-expression, then, yeah, the only failure is to not do it. What an awesome conversation. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, it's great. Yep.
And I tell you what, this background's really starting to come along, Chad. I'm really, really excited about how this is starting to pop.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about what you're working on, kind of what's going into your process right now, and your thinking and all that.
Well, so I am absolutely 1,000% terrified of painting this sweater that my daughter is wearing in this painting. It's kind of a fluted, soft, I don't know what you call it, like rugged kind of sweater. And it's got all these flutes just going through it. And I'm absolutely terrified of it. I know how I want to approach it. I know I'm going to drop in my values, right? And then create the flutes on top of it. So what I'm doing is I'm working around it to get myself comfortable with it. So right now I'm working in the negative space in the background, these shelving units. And what I really have to work on is making sure that there is atmospheric perspective in this painting, not to the same extent of your drawing, but I need to make sure that they recede back in space. And so what I'm really trying to do is stay loose, stay painterly, not focus too much on detail, right? Let the detail dissipate as it recedes in space. And that way it appears as if it's behind her, right? because as things get closer to us, they become more detailed. Just like you're saying, you want yours to look like it's going miles and miles and miles back. I just need mine to look like it's 15, 20 feet behind her.
Yeah.
And I can still achieve that by using the same technique, just to a different strength, right? And so that's what I'm focusing on now with these shelving elements, is I want you to see that there is a plant back there, there's things on the shelves, but I don't want it to be a focal point. I want it to blend into the background and really push our background, midground, and foreground.
Yep. Well, if it's any encouragement, you were terrified by the pants, and the pants look amazing. So
well, thank you.
I think you'll do just fine.
Fear is a great motivator.
Yeah. Now that should be a quote. That should be a T-shirt.
Yeah, fear is a great motivator. I think it probably is. I don't think I'm the first person to have stated that one. It probably is a T-shirt. We just need to find it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
But it's still it's funny. I don't know if that's been applied into art though, right? I mean, fear is a great motivator. It's probably been used, but I think fear is a great motivator within art. Oh man, now you've got me going. Okay. So this is one of the things I've been very adamant about lately, and that is do the hard things. If you're terrified of doing the painting like this, do that painting.
Yep.
If you're scared of doing a 6 feet by 8 foot drawing like Chad is, out of almost pure imagination, then that's what you should do. Do the things that scare you, because those are also oftentimes, not always, in art, very rewarding, right? You're getting out of your comfort zone. You're doing things that intimidate you and motivate you, but you're going to do the hard things, and you're going to get the payoff from it as well. And it may not be the payoff that you think it should be. It may not happen when you think it should or how you think it should, but the hard work will always pay off. I used to tell every single one of my athletes, your hard work will pay off. I promise you. Maybe not how you think it should, when you think it should, but it will pay off for you. And I believe the same thing is true in art.
Yeah, I saw on a reel interview with David Bowie, and he made this comment about when you're creating art that you should always get to that. If you ever settle for painting or drawing something that you're comfortable with, you should never settle for that, is basically what he was saying.
Wow, that's good. I like that a
Instead,
lot.
he said, you need to get out into the deep water, not so far that you could drown, but just so far where you know that if you just stay out there, you're not going to be able to swim for very long. That's the perfect place to be. And that translates into art in the sense that you want to do a work of art that's just beyond your ability. Because if you just kind of rely on your gifting or what you're used to doing, you're going to create boring art. But if you put yourself out just further than you think you can do, it's going to force you to learn things and work on things you've never worked on before.
Yep.
When I think of this drawing, the thing that terrifies me is working on one area, getting over here, and then all of a sudden this corner over here not working.
Yep.
And I don't know exactly what I'm going to do in this bottom left corner, so I decided I'm going to work on the rest. So it gives me an idea of tone and environment and all that. But I may get like 3/4 of this thing done, and then the last quarter goes horribly. And then I think, man, I've ruined a 6 foot drawing. But that's for me, that's my deep end. I've got to work through that and figure out how do I solve that problem. So yeah, I think it's very important to challenge yourself and get out beyond what you're used to and what you're comfortable with.
Well, and I like what Luke Talks VT here has been saying as well. They've given us a beautiful comment about, and if you're reading through it, I encourage you guys to read through it because there's some phenomenal comments that are coming through. There is a difference in different mediums, right? Writing, you have those same kind of challenge. Sarah beforehand was talking about music, Chad. I know the theater arts, right? The performing arts have their own challenges of some of those things. The visual arts are different, because you have a visual reference. But I think, Luke Talks VT, that's a really valid point of what you're saying is it's somebody taking the time to teach you, or you taking the time to learn or to build those skill sets. It's a whole different approach when you have some feedback or mentoring or coaching and tutelage that allow you to advance. And that's part of the reason we built the Visual Arts Academy and Studio. And we're so fortunate to be able to do what we're doing. If you're just joining us, we are the Visual Arts Academy and Studio. This is Master Draftsman and Lead Instructor Chad Nuss. I'm one of the co-founders and lead instructor, Seth Jones. And we're just painting and working on things. We've got so many wonderful comments from all kinds of different individuals. Thank you for jumping in and joining us. Please ask these questions. Give us your feedback. We're working on an oil painting that's 30 by 40, and Chad's working on a massive drawing between charcoal and graphite. But ask questions. Thanks for giving us a go. We're probably going to keep going here for about another 15, 30 minutes, Chad. What do you think?
Yep, that sounds great. Yep.
15 to 30 minutes, guys. And thank you for all the wonderful comments and feedback. You guys have been absolutely amazing this evening. But we're going to keep working. Luke Talks VT, thank you guys. Sarah, thank you for joining. Joe, thanks for giving us a lot of love and feedback. Little Esquire, you've been phenomenal. Thank you for all the comments. Make sure you guys give us a like, share, a comment. It helps us. It gets us out there, and it encourages us. Makes Chad and I feel encouraged that we're sharing some love. We're sharing some good insight and some good information. So thank you guys for everything you guys are doing, and we appreciate you all so very much. These shelves are a little bit more challenging than I anticipated, Chad, because I want to make sure that as a viewer, this is something you were talking about, like the difference between being up close. It's almost like pointillism and stippling, right? Yeah. I want there to be a payoff for the viewer from 20 feet, and then also a payoff when you're up close, right? I want the viewer to enjoy the piece, not just from one distance or from one angle. I want them to get the sense of it. And so I want there to be enough detail. Little Esquire, geez, buy me dinner first. You will find, if this is your first time watching, I've been called by our students a big cheerleader, and I probably am. I think I'm an encouraging coach. I've always been that way when I've coached sports and taught as a teacher and instructor. Yes, I am overly positive, but that's just how I am. So you got to take it for what it is. I'm
the one that's the dark and stormy rain clouds. So yeah, don't worry. I'll give you some negative, harsh comments. Just wait.
They usually come crawling to me. Mr. Chad was a little tough on me. I'm like, oh, God, he's making you better. He's making you improve. But I want this piece to pay off, right? I want it to, and I'm going to step away here in a second and really give you guys the whole piece, because I don't know if I've given you guys the whole painting, but I really want the payoff to be from different angles, right? I want you to be able to enjoy the piece as you walk past very quickly, but then I want you to, ooh, what was that? And then as you approach and you get closer, that you're just absolutely blown away. I think that's one of the shames, Chad, of and it's unfortunate because you have to in modern museums. You don't get to get close to paintings anymore.
Yeah.
Because of people destroying them and touching them and all these other things. There is a difference when you can be a nose length away from some of the brushwork and from the textures and the modeling and the molding. And I think that's kind of a shame. But I'm going to step away, Chad. Give me 1 second. I'm going to pull this camera back and give a nice big view of it so that guys can get it and see it. But let me see what we've got here. All right. Let me see. Let's see how this is working. So there's the bottom. There's the feet.
Yeah, that's
you
great.
Can see that there. And I've been working on the couch, the top of the couch, and then coming up into that background.
Yeah, so, the floor on that is incredible.
Oh, you're way too kind, good sir. Thank you. And then actually, I guess, let me see if I can do this. I'll give you guys a sneak peek of the new piece. Chad, what do you think? Should I show them the...
Yeah, do it.
So here's the new piece that I'm working on. It's kind of hard. I don't know if you guys can see it or not.
Yeah, but you can see it. Yep.
You can see it all right?
Yep. That's great. I look forward to seeing you do that one.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Well, it goes back to kind of what you were talking about, Chad, which is, I like a tighter underdrawing. I like having a drawing that's a little bit tighter for me to reference, to work through. Other artists, they don't. That's not how they work. They prefer to be looser and things that. Oh man, I'm so glad we got on this. It brings me back to what we were originally talking about. Part of the reason I think I like a tighter underdrawing is because I like paintings that tell narratives. Maybe it goes back to my undergraduate in illustration, or maybe I'm just such a talker that I like a good story. I consider myself a storyteller.
Yeah.
And so I like paintings that tell stories. And so when you're asking if I like impressionistic work or if I like, very abstract, theoretical type pieces, I do. I enjoy them, but I like a really good narrative. I like something that I can get a full story out of it, right? Or I can create my own story. Not saying you can't do that with abstract work, guys and gals, but I like the idea that there's a story being told and it takes me through that. One of my favorite paintings from a movement standpoint and a storytelling standpoint is The Oath of the Hirachi. I'm butchering that title and I apologize, but it's the oath of, the Greeks, the 3 Greek brothers.
Yeah,
Isn't their father with the swords. That's right. Yeah. And it's this beautiful narrative, because you see the structure of how they take you through the painting and they tell you this whole story. And that painting is actually what allowed him to open up his own studio and become a master and to teach. But it's a beautiful example, the Oath of the Hirachi. And I apologize, guys, I'm butchering it. But look it up. It's a beautiful painting. And I think I love the style of those kind of paintings, Chad, and more realism, because it allows me to understand that story a little bit better, right? I love that narrative-driven element, and I think it's beautiful. And I hope I'm achieving that with this piece as well. Is there's a story behind my daughter at 7 years old going from that childhood innocence to that super confidence of a tween. You know what I mean? Like that growth of childhood innocence kind of leaving to a certain extent, but I got you. Like I'm smart enough. I'm going to outwit you. I'm growing. And I really hope I can capture that, with the lean, the pose, the hands in the pockets, the attitude, the sass. That's really what I'm trying to capture with the narrative here. And I don't think you can get that with a fully abstract piece.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Dun, dun, dun. So how has, for those of you who just joined, you switched between traditional graphite over to a hybrid pencil. Is that correct?
Yes and no. So right now I'm using, this is a 4H, just regular graphite pencil. And the reason why I'm using that is it's serving as kind of an underdrawing, because this mountain, this hill area in this valley needs to be so it's a complex thing here, because atmospheric perspective would tell you that a mountain or a hill that's kind of set back is going to be a bit lighter and less detail. However, in this valley, there's these very dark storm clouds that are coming over. And so that's going to create a darker tone. So I'm going to start light and then just add layers of dark until I get it where I want it to be. So I'm starting with the 4H graphite because I've found, and this is probably part of my own inexperience, is that with the charcoal, it's very difficult to work very subtly with these lighter tones. So I'm using the graphite for the lighter tones. And then for tones like in here, I'm using charcoal, because one of the downsides of graphite is when you get into these softer leads, it leaves this sheen. And I'm sitting here looking at the upper part up in this cloud here. You can't really see it on that screen, but from where I'm sitting, the light is bouncing off of it, and I can see all of the sheen, because I originally used an 8B pencil up there. And that's when I decided to switch over to charcoal, because charcoal is very matte. You don't get any of that shine. I was trying to use and I still do have, like, my 2B pencil is one of those, it's called a Mars Lumograph Black. It's a matte type pencil, which helps eliminate some of that shine. The only downside with these is they're very grainy, so you can't see it even here. Maybe I can try and get a little bit closer. Let's see if I can capture some of that grain. So if you see, you can see the paper coming through. It's not a smooth blend, just like over here, it's very smooth blend. That's charcoal. These are that matte pencil, so it's very grainy, very difficult to get a good blend on it. So I'm cutting back on using those pencils and using instead the charcoal, because it has such a nice soft blend, which that's what I'm looking for. So I was working down here, and then I'm kind of taking a break on that because I want to get into this hill back here so I can compare the tones, because I know this ridge down here is going to be very black, especially when I get down towards the bottom. It's going to be almost a flat black, and then there will be some tiny figures towards the bottom that I'll put kind of like a halo of light around, and they'll be silhouetted against that. But I don't want to go in too black or too dark right now, because if you go dark, it's hard to lift it out. So I want to be pretty hesitant. So I just did a little section that's nice and dark, just to make sure my tone is correct when I balance it off the hill behind it.
Awesome. Well, Esquire, thanks for joining us. Hope you have a great evening. We appreciate you jumping in and all your wonderful comments, and for being a part of the live stream. We really appreciate you.
Yeah,
take care, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Yeah, it was awesome. I appreciate it.
And Chad, I think, we've had some recent students that have really kind of pushed us and asked us about materials, right? And your materials are important. They are important, but they're not the end all be all, right? Like, as you develop your skills, you will find a tendency to find materials that you prefer, right?
Yeah.
That you tend to work well with. And I've seen people use all kinds of different materials, all kinds of different mediums, and it really just comes down to what techniques are you using and what tools allow you as an individual artist to achieve those techniques to the level that you want to achieve, if that makes sense, right? I've seen some painters use some of the most basic paints I've ever seen that I would probably never dream of using, and they do beautiful works with them, right? And then I've seen other people that are like, I can't color mix with this because it's water, and so I think it's just a personal preference, but I do think on certain techniques, your materials do make a difference. Having a really good pencil, color pencils are a good example, I think. Having really good, strong color pencils with strong pigment and good saturation makes a big difference when you go into your color blending.
Yeah, I saw a video one time where they compared, I forget what the price range was, but it was like a $2 number 2 pencil and a $200 top of the line pencil. And you could tell some subtle differences. But at the same time, if you're skilled as what's that?
To an untrained eye.
To an untrained eye, yes. But on the other hand, if you're skilled as an artist, you can use, like our neighbor talked about, they had a friend of theirs was a really amazing landscape artist, and they were just blown away that one night, they had a fire outside, they were just hanging out, and the artist picked up a piece of the wood that was burnt and used that to make them a quick drawing. And they were just blown away by that. But, I told them, I was like, well, that's basically a charcoal drawing, because what he's using is that almost like graphite that's coming off that burnt wood. So there is a time and a place for better materials are going to help you create better things. But at the same time, it goes back to the practice you put in, skill level, and all that kind of thing. It's the same with like in cooking. I always go back to cooking because I've worked in restaurants for 20 plus years, and I worked in a kitchen for many, many of those years. And, a skilled chef can use any ingredients and make an amazing dish. But if he has ingredients that are fresh and beautiful and picked from a garden, that dish is going to have just an elevated sense of quality versus just picking something out from Kroger. It's like there's something to be said about good materials for sure.
Yep, I would agree. But what I don't like is I don't like it when people use materials as kind of an excuse. You know what I mean? Like as an out.
Yeah.
Oh well, this and this and this and this and look, there's some things that don't work well, but don't let that be your out. Don't let that be the reason you say, I'm just not going to work on this. I'm not going to paint anymore. I'm not going to do that. Right. Like, don't use that as an out for why you're not going to continue to try to grow as an artist, or why you're not going to give yourself a chance to create. Right. And I think a lot of our students that come in that aren't as experienced as others, they come in and they're like, well, I didn't have this, or I didn't have that. I couldn't really do this. I'm like, look, pencils and paper are really cheap. You can be very creative with just, very, very minimal materials and do some wonderful artwork, right? One of the great professors I had, an artist that I got to follow for a long time, he was telling me about when he was a struggling artist out in New York, Chad. He was an illustrator, and, he couldn't really afford much, and, living up in New York at the time. And but what he could afford was pizza. That was like his big food, right? So he'd get all these giant pizza boxes. And one day he found that he couldn't afford Bristol board. He couldn't afford Bristol board to do his illustration work on. But he found that, boy, pizza boxes, when you put a coat of gesso on them, they actually work out really well and give them a great texture. And so he started doing all of this work on these cardboard boxes, pizza boxes, and ended up getting a massive amount of illustration work because they didn't know what he was painting on.
Yep.
They didn't know what medium, they just saw the work that he was doing and they loved it. And so that was a big lesson for me, which is don't be overwhelmed by not having the best of the best. Do the best you can with what you have, and then the best of the best will come to you, right? And so I think, don't let that be an excuse. Don't let that stop you from giving it a go.
Yeah, I think some artists struggle with the opposite problem, where they feel like once they get a certain pen or pencil or type
I
of
want to use it. Yeah.
paint, then they'll think, oh, I finally arrived. Now I can finally get to work. And the reality is, as much as materials help, they don't solve all your problems. So there's nothing that can replace hard work and perseverance.
I agree, 1,000%. And what's funny is that's most aspects of life, not just art.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's most things. Got to do the work. Got to do the work. And that's one of the things I love about these live session chats. This forces me to sit down and paint for a good hour and a half. It forces me to really look at things differently. It challenges me to have these conversations. And it reminds me to put into practice some of the stuff we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Like, hey, you're pushing this, you're pushing that. Well, why aren't you doing that right now? You know what? Good point. I should be. And so I really appreciate the fact that you and I get to sit down and work together and complete a lot of artwork in these sessions. And boy, are we so glad all of you guys are joining us. How fun is it to have you guys join us? I hope you're drawing or sketching or just watching and enjoying it as we work through it. Please feel free to ask questions, give us comments or feedback. A like, a share, a follow is great too. With the holidays coming up, Chad, maybe we do another one early next week. Maybe we do one maybe Monday, or maybe we can look. I don't know. Christmas Eve may be a little tough with our kiddos, but maybe we try to fit one in on Monday and paint these for people.
Yep. Yeah, I love doing these live events, and selfishly, I love the fact that it gives us time to work on these projects. So
Absolutely.
And this was part of the dream of Voss, or of the Visual Arts Academy, was for us to be able to work in the studio together and do a live event. So it's kind of a dream come true in some ways to be able to do this. So I'm excited to be a part of it.
Well, and I'm excited to get some of the other artists in here, get some of our co-founder Thomas in here, who's a phenomenal artist in his own right, and get him in here, get some other artist friends, and have some good conversations, because I think that's part of it is, we talk about being in a connected world, right, Chad? The influences that we get to have, the conversations. And I think it'll be fun to get some other people in here and really have some good conversation about their thoughts on some of the art. Maybe they have a different viewpoint than we do, or maybe they kind of piggyback and go, you know what, we think you guys got a good take on it. But I think these kind of conversations are great. And I'm looking forward to a lot more. And we knew that the Visual Arts Academy, we are a local studio. We are a local academy. We have a gallery here in the historic Middletown of Louisville, Kentucky. But we also know that we can reach a lot of other artists, and you don't have to. Our co-founder Thomas, has a statement: you don't have to work in a vacuum. And with the digital age and with live streams and everything else, we all get to work and paint together. And so isn't that awesome that we get to do our individual works of art, and we can share those feedback, share the comments. We all get to be engaged no matter where we're located. It's a marvel of this century, and I think it's just the most spectacular thing. Or maybe I'm just ridiculous, Chad, but I think it's absolutely spectacular.
Well, you can be ridiculous sometimes, but this
that is true. Yeah. But it's a genuine ridiculous, right? I mean,
absolutely.
I am crazy, but it is what it is. I used to joke all the time. I'm like, people are like, boy, you're so high energy. You're kind of intense and ridiculous at some things. And I go, could you imagine being married to this and it's 24/7?
Yeah.
My poor wife.
It's funny talking about that. My wife often jokes because I tend to overanalyze things and think a lot. And it's part of being. It's part of being an artist, and then it's also part of my personality. And my wife is the exact opposite. She's more of a gut person. So, if it just hits her in a certain way in the gut, she's like, that's what we need to do. Whereas I'm like thinking through all the different angles, and I don't know, maybe we should try this, this, and this, or whatever. And she often jokes, she's like, man, if I lived in your head, I'd probably be on drugs, or I need therapy or something. I was like, well, yeah, I feel the same way.
But aren't we fortunate to be who we are?
Yeah.
It's a wonderful thing. And I think a lot of people need to be reminded of that. It's okay to be you. We're all quirky. We all got our differences. Yeah. We're all unique. We're all great creations, right? And we all get to create too. And I think it's wonderful. And a lot of times when you're down in the dumps, it happens to me a lot. Chad knows this. He's been able to be with me and help me through some of these times, these days where I'm depressed or sad or down. But the great thing is every time I come to sit down in these paintings, every time I come to sit and do some artwork, there's an energy that's released, right, Chad? There's an excitement that comes from it. There's a fulfilling practice. Even if I talk to one of our students, Patricia, all the time. Even if I have to throw away every drawing I sat down and did in that hour and a half, even if I have to rework everything I just painted, there's so much positivity that comes out from creating, right? And Chad, what is that book you had me read? Do you remember the author and the title of it? I want to give a shout out to that real quick. What was it?
This is the Art and Faith one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it Makoto Fuji? I'm butchering the name.
Yeah, Makoto Fujimura, I think is how you say his name.
It's absolutely brilliant, and it was very eye-opening to me to see how the energy that I create with my artwork helps me in my downtimes, right? Like, and it's funny because my wife's instincts when we very first started dating, and this was something that was amazing to me, Chad, is in the second or third week that we were dating, I was having kind of a rough day, and she looked at me and she goes, "When's the last time you painted?"
Yeah.
When's the last time you painted? It's like the Snickers commercial. You're not you when you're hungry. She's like, you're not you when you're not creating.
Yeah, that's amazing.
You're meant to create. And I remember going, oh, I'm going to marry this one, because she got it. She understood that was part of the core being that I am. Yeah. And I think, a lot of times we look at those kind of things as not good. And I don't agree with that. I think it's good. I think it's good to know who you are and that you're meant to create, and you're called to create, and the creativity is going to help bring out the excitement and the energy and the positivity in your life. And I hope everybody that's watching, I hope you experience that when you work. I hope you experience that joy when you create, because it is an absolute wonderful thing. We are so fortunate to get to do what we do, and I hope that you feel that same way. Working in on some of these. I think I'm going to have to bring in a mop, Chad, and soften some of these up. I may have gotten a little too detail heavy, and I may have to work some of these in and soften them up so that they recede back into space. As we were talking about, atmospheric perspective can happen not just over, miles, right? It's not just something that takes place over miles. It can happen within feet too. And, in photography, we talk a lot about like depth of field, the depth of field and things of that nature. But it's one of those things that we really want to make sure that I'm focusing the focal points of the painting in the correct areas. And so it's not necessarily atmospheric perspective, right? Because you're not adding that atmosphere. But the depth of field, the focal points, the background, midground, foreground, I have to achieve those elements. And I need to soften some of these up, I think. I think they're getting a little too hard-edged. Dun, dun, dun. Which I am going to go ahead and do now. So what I've got, if you're watching, I've got just a nice little mop here. It's an oval mop. It's a 1-inch. And you guys can see it's already been used quite a bit on this painting. But all I'm really going to kind of come in and do is just gently massage this wet on wet and break down some of those lines, break down some of those shapes, and just let them breathe and relax and soften up some of those hard edges. And that's going to really push it into the background. If you guys get a chance and you're in the area, stop by and see us. In historic Middletown in Louisville, Kentucky. You guys get to see some of these works of art in person. And as I had mentioned earlier, I think seeing a reproduction of a painting is one thing, but seeing it in person is a completely different experience. So come on by the Visual Arts Academy and studio, see the beautiful works of art Chad's got in his studio. I've got some of my work here, and we've got student work that you will be blown away by. So make sure you come by and give us a visit here if you're in the local area, guys.
Your painting mop is like one of these paper stumps. Does the same thing.
That's right.
Softens up the edges, blends things in a bit.
Which again is a very similar technique, right? So when we talk to our students about, hey, these techniques translate across mediums. It's not something that's just specific there. It might be a slightly different application, but it's the same kind of concept, right? It's the same kind of concept, and you can use those learned skills across multiple mediums, across different different paintings or drawings, and it still has that same effect. So yeah, your blending stump is the same kind of application as the mop, and I'm sure there's other things like like a wash and watercolor that you can achieve certain layering and mopping with. So it's fun to see how those applications work across different mediums, or at least to me it is. Oh. Well, thank you. We really appreciate that comment. She says, we're absolutely amazing. How nice is that, Chad?
Thank you. That's encouraging.
Yeah.
We talk about comments and questions and how helpful they are and give us energy. That's the best right there.
Absolutely. And we thank you for joining. We know that you have one that has a ton of energy as well. It's absolutely wonderful when you see young artists that are so incredibly passionate. That's, I think, one of the greatest joys that I have being an instructor here, Chad, and being a part of this is seeing those young artists, those personalities coming to life and expressing themselves in so many different mediums and so many different things. It's the greatest joy, right? When they come to the studio and they're grinning ear to ear because this is a place where they get to create. And that is one of the reasons we exist, is for those young artists that are just passionate about art, passionate about self-expression, and honestly, eager to learn. I think that's the greatest thing, right, Chad, is when you have students that are eager to learn, eager to absorb, and it's absolutely fantastic. We're so fortunate to get to do what we do.
Yeah, it makes your job, and we've talked about this before, but makes your job as a teacher so much easier when the student comes in wanting to learn. And that's been our experience. Like all the students that we've had here are here because they want to be here, and it makes our job not just easier, but enjoyable. Who doesn't want to be around someone else that's just as excited as you are to learn new things about art? And they're willing to be pushed and encouraged to try new things, and they'll be willing to do it because they want to learn. They want to be here. So we're excited to be a part of that.
And just in case you are local, our next round of 8-week courses start January 6th. We don't have any courses currently going on. We have exploration sessions. You can come and paint with us for 2 hours, do a session that's really, really quick, take an oil painting from beginning to end, and learn a lot about the alla prima oil painting technique. But if you haven't signed up for some of our sessions coming up in January, please make sure you go to our website, vaaslouisville.com. You can see all of our 8-week sessions, our 4-week intro to art sessions, as well as schedule some of our 2-hour exploration sessions as well. We have a ton of supplies. We have materials. Please come by and see us. Take a second out of your day and come visit us and say hello. We'd love to meet you in person. And Chad, I'm going to put some finishing touches up on here, brother. I hope you're doing well on your end. I don't know if you can maybe give us a little tilt of the camera there, show us that mountain range. But I think we'll probably wrap up here in just a little bit, guys.
Yep. So this is kind of the screen's in the way, but you can see where we've got over here. And then see if I can lower it down and get a little bit closer. Let's do this here. So
I am so blown away at how I know that you've utilized reference points of mountain ranges to educate yourself on how those mountain ranges look. But the idea that you're just creating this out of your own mind, to me, is just amazing, Chad. I think it's absolutely brilliant because look at all that texture. Look at those hatching and cross hatching. Look, it's you're sculpting a mountain on paper. It's spectacular.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, especially being pretty terrified of doing this. But yeah, so every time I sit down, especially when I'm starting a new mountain over here, this is one that's a bit further back. And so there you go. It's still quite messy, a little rough around the edges, obviously, because I just started it. But before I sat down today, I got out some pictures, searched some pictures of like mountain scenes, and I literally typed in Google mountains in the distance in a storm. And so I just looked at a bunch of pictures and just got in my mind a reference of what it would look like. And so as I was describing before, I know from the basic principles of atmospheric perspective, this second line of mountains is going to have less detail. It's going to be a bit softer. It's going to be a bit lighter. So I'm just replicating the texture that I've done on these mountains here, but just a little bit with a little bit less detail, and using a lot more blending and that kind of thing. But the thing that I have to watch is the lighting, because there's going to be some really dark storm clouds up above, and that's going to affect the light sources and the secondary sources as well. I want some light coming from behind these mountains a bit, so it'll give a bit of a silhouette. So I want to make this mountain lighter, but I also want it to be quite dark as well. It just depends on what's going on around it. So I'm starting with a very light tone, just going in, getting some of the texture set. And then after I finish this part, then I'll start going into the sky, really getting those dark thunder clouds and storm clouds, some other kind of weather elements. Like I'm going to do some hail falling from here. Going to do probably, I don't know if I'll do like a tornado or anything, but there'll be some kind of other event over here. So yeah.
So that's a good point. So you mean to tell me that you have a general idea and a concept of what your piece is going to be, but as you work on it, you're kind of sculpting it as you go?
Yes. Yeah. So I put in just a bare outline of a mountain. I knew that there was going to be a mountain here. I have down here, there's some lines. I know that there's going to be a valley right here. I know over to the right, which you can't see over here, which I guess I could show you. Let me slide this over a bit. Yeah, so over here you can see very light pencil marks. So I know that there's going to be another mountain up here, but this mountain is going to be exploding forward. So there's going to be some very large boulders in this area, and it's going to be backed by very dark clouds. And so I did some kind of swooping lines to give the indication that this is going to be falling forward this way. And then this part of the, this part of the mountain is going to be disintegrating and exploding. So just like with this mountain over here, I have a ton of pictures on my phone of explosions, exploding rocks, falling rocks, really like tumultuous kind of clouds and all that. So I look at those and I look at the details. I spend a lot of time trying to understand how the light works with those types of things. And then I sit down and I try to recreate that. I will get my phone out from time to time. Like when I was working on this mountain over here, I get it out. I'd look at some mountains. I'd kind of see what do the patterns look like and then just recreate that. Because the one thing I noticed, especially in nature, that the patterns are so abstract and so random. Yes, sometimes you need to sit down and actually draw a mountain from a picture to understand how it works. But you start to see some general patterns in a mountain. So, for example, in this mountain, a lot of mountains have a ridge. So I just put a random ridge in there, and I put some other ridges in here. And I knew the light source is coming from here, so that's going to be highlighted, or hardly any tone in this area here. And then behind it, it's going to be a darker tone. So later, I might go back in and darken this up a little bit, depending on how the hole looks. If you look at a mountain with snow, you'll get a lot of these kind of horizontal patterns. You'll get some of these vertical patterns as well. So I just looked at the general idea of what a mountain does and then try to recreate some of that in the drawing. And so that's what I'm doing here. It's a bit random at first, and then I'll go back in and I'll refine it a little bit more. And it's just a continual process.
Well, Chad, it is an absolute joy to get to be a part of this and to get to watch this piece come to life. It's very rare to get to watch all the behind the scenes and the thought process. We're so glad that we get to bring this to you all. It's incredibly exciting for us. We get to share our creative process with you, our thoughts with you, and you guys get to share yours with us. And we absolutely love it. It has been an absolute joy getting to do these. Chad and I have been after every session, we're like, when are we going to do the next one? We got to do the next one. Yep. And so as our classes get solidified, guys, we're going to post an actual schedule of when we're going to do these on a pretty regular basis. But I hope you guys stay tuned with us, because we're probably going to do another one maybe before the holidays. We'll see what the schedule looks like. Maybe get one more in before the end of the year. But you guys have been absolutely amazing today. Everybody's comments and feedback, their thoughts, their processes from all these different places and all these different people has been absolutely spectacular. We can't thank you enough here at the Visual Arts Academy and Studio. It's been a wonderful, oh my gosh, almost 2 hours, Chad. We've almost been doing this for 2 hours.
I love it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Thank you guys so much. Chad, do you want to take us out today?
Sure, yeah. And just like Seth said, we really feed off all the comments and the feedback, and the interaction has been really great. We do look forward to getting back on again. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to meeting all of you and talking more the next time we're on. So we appreciate it from the Visual Arts Academy and Studio in Louisville, Kentucky. We will see you again soon.
Thank you all.